For my entire life, Islam was my identity. I defended it, I loved it, and I honestly believed it was the perfect, logical truth from God. I was raised to see the world through its verses, and I found real comfort in its promises and community in its practice. But a few years ago, I started pulling on a single intellectual thread, and my whole worldview just unraveled. I've been quiet about this for a long time, partly out of fear and partly out of respect for the people I still love, but I can't keep ignoring the logical issues that led me to walk away. So, in this video, I'm going to share the 5 logical reasons why I left Islam. It wasn't some big dramatic event. It really just started with a quiet, nagging question that I kept trying to push away. I was reading about the eternal fate of non-believers, people who were good and kind, but just weren't Muslim. The thought that they'd be condemned to an eternity of suffering simply because they were born into a different family or culture struck me as deeply unfair. This wasn't just a theological puzzle, it was a deep moral wound. While some scholars and interpretations offer more nuanced views on salvation for non-Muslims, the dominant message I received was one of condemnation for disbelief. That first doubt opened the floodgates. As I started to look closer, I found several logical problems I just couldn't ignore anymore. Here are the 5 that hit me the hardest. The first major hurdle for me was the paradox of divine will. In Islam, it's a core belief that everything is predestined by Allah. Every leaf that falls, every single choice you make, was written down before you were even created. But at the same time, we're told we have free will and will be judged for our actions on Judgment Day. This just never added up for me. How can a just God hold me responsible for a choice that He already willed for me to make? If my path was already written, am I really free? Or am I just an actor in a divine play, reading from a script I never got to see? Punishing someone for an action you destined them to take seems like a contradiction in the very definition of justice. I know that Islamic theologians have debated this for centuries, with concepts like kasb, acquisition, trying to bridge the gap. But for me, I couldn't reconcile the idea of an all-powerful, predestining God with a just God who demands personal accountability. The second reason was the clash between certain verses in the Quran and established scientific facts. I was always told the Quran was full of scientific miracles that proved its divine origin. But when I actually investigated for myself, I found claims that were hard to square with modern science. For instance, the Quran describes human embryology in stages, starting from a drop of fluid that becomes an alaka, often translated as a clot or leech-like thing. Historically, this description is strikingly similar to the theories of the Greek physician Galen, who wrote centuries before Islam, rather than reflecting what we know from modern embryology. While apologists argue for metaphorical interpretations, the parallels to ancient pre-scientific ideas were too strong for me to dismiss. Other verses, like the one describing the sun setting in a spring of muddy water, Quran 1886, also troubled me. Many scholars today explain this as what the observer, Dhul Qarnayn, saw from his perspective, not a literal scientific statement. But for a book claiming to be the literal word of the creator of the universe, I expected a perspective that wasn't limited by ancient human observation. These weren't just small interpretive issues, they were claims about the natural world that felt out of place in a divine text. This brings me back to the issue that started it all, the concept of hell. Islam teaches that Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the most gracious, the most merciful. Yet the Quran also contains vivid, terrifying descriptions of eternal torture for those who disbelieve. I really struggled with how infinite punishment could be a just response for a finite lifetime of disbelief, especially for people who never had a truly compelling reason to believe. How could a God of infinite love and mercy create people He knew would end up in everlasting torment? The logic just felt cruel. I couldn't reconcile the image of a God of infinite mercy with a God who would subject His own creation to endless, unimaginable suffering for making the wrong choice, a choice He supposedly already knew they would make. My fourth reason is about ethics. I started to feel a real cognitive dissonance between my own values of equality and some of the rules in Islamic scripture. For example, in certain financial matters, a woman's testimony is valued at half that of a man's, Quran 2.282, and inheritance laws give daughters half the share of sons, Quran 4.11. And while many modern Muslims emphasize the more peaceful verses, the existence of commands to fight non-believers until they are subjugated, Quran 9:29, was deeply troubling to me. I know these verses have historical contexts and are interpreted in different ways, but their presence in what is meant to be a perfect and timeless text felt impossible to square with a universally just God. I couldn't reconcile these laws, which seem to create a permanent hierarchy between men and women, and between Muslims and non-Muslims, with the idea of a just creator. Finally, my belief in the Quran as a perfect, flawless book was shaken by what looked like internal contradictions. For a book that challenges critics to find any discrepancy in it, I found several that were hard to ignore. For example, some verses seem to describe the creation of the heavens before the earth, while others appear to reverse that order. In one place, the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion, but in others, as I mentioned, it prescribes fighting those who don't believe. Muslim scholars developed the concept of abrogation, where a later verse can cancel out an earlier one, to explain these differences. But to me, that felt like a human attempt to smooth over inconsistencies in a text that was supposed to be divinely perfect from the very beginning. The need for such a tool suggested a human hand at work. These 5 points weren't just intellectual games. They were the threads that, when I pulled them, unraveled the fabric of my faith. Each one was a pillar that, for me, turned out to be logically unsound. Leaving the faith of my family and my ancestors has been the most difficult and isolating thing I've ever done. But it has also been freeing. I no longer have to do the mental gymnastics to make my conscience fit with Scripture. I can finally live with a sense of intellectual honesty and moral consistency. If you're someone who is questioning, just know that you aren't alone. It's a scary road, but I believe the search for truth is always worth it. I'm not here to give you answers, just to share my story. If any of this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more about my journey, consider subscribing. Thanks for listening. By the way, all of this research comes from people who have left religion, and I'm just an AI character who gathered their stories for you. Definitely share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them.